spoke about this once before and the file was deleted from my phone, but it was about a CIT biology experiment that I felt I learned a lot from. We were studying single-celled organisms called paramecium, and our instructions, the teacher had a bag, essentially a satchel containing mostly water, but also clusters of algae and paramecium. So paramecium are these single-celled organisms that contain organelles, and our objective for the science experiment was to make pencil diagrams of all of the organelles contained within the paramecium and to study their eating habits. Now, their primary stimuli or source of food was algae, is algae, and our instructions were to get a microphone with a microphone powered telescope, powered microscope with a little plastic clear slide, and we were to use a teat pipette to suck and draw out paramecium containing water, and then squeeze it out onto the slide, and then try to zoom in through the microscope onto the moving paramecium in order to observe them. Now, the problem with the experiment was that because of the zoom on the microscope and the rate at which the paramecium move in search for algae to consume, we were instructed to use a highly viscous substance called methyl cellulose, and the point of the methyl cellulose was to mix it in with the water sample and the culture sample of the paramecium, so that should we see a paramecium, the viscosity of the methyl cellulose would cause it to move and travel at a lower speed. We would essentially be slowing down its movements so that we could observe it. Our teacher at the time, his name was Mr. Ford, and he had said quite openly that if you can justify a way to modify an experiment, you're welcome to. Now, all I really did, it wasn't a huge feat, but what I decided was that since the goal and agendas of these paramecium is to find and consume algae, then if I were to move my teat pipette within the algae bag and point it at a cluster of algae and withdraw a cluster of algae that was visible to the eye, then if I squoze that algae out onto the slide under the microscope and zoomed in on it, then my assumption was there would probably already be paramecium around that algae that had found it, that would be feeding off it. And since I'd assumed or predicted that they would indeed be feeding off it, then the fact that they had found some algae to feed on would demotivate them from moving and going around looking for more. So I thought, in that event, I can make the experiment more natural, because if the paramecium are already going to be parked by the algae, they'll have no motivation to move and search for any more. I'd predicted that they'd just be more or less chilling out there, feeding off the algae. So modifying the experiment in this fashion meant that I predicted I also wouldn't need to use any methyl cellulose, since the stationary paramecium around the algae had no reason to leave the algae. I could zoom in on them and study them as much as I want. And so that was just what I did. I told the teacher, can I just please draw out a sample of the algae cluster itself and request not to use any methyl cellulose? And he said, yeah, sure. So I did that. This is at CIT and early in the millennium, and I can remember squeezing out the little bunch of algae. To the naked eye, you can see the algae bits, but you can't see the paramecium to the naked eye. But I put the little bit of algae on the slide on the microscope, and I looked through the microscope at the algae, and I was right. There were numerous paramecium parked around the algae, and I could see the little silica hairs that surround the exterior of the single-celled organism, just kind of fluttering around the outside of the organism as they fed on algae. Now, so I managed to achieve the objective of the experiment, having eliminated any need for the viscous metal cellulose to slow down the movement speed of the paramecium, because they just weren't moving. So yeah, I zoomed in on them and began to draw my diagram of their organelles. Now at that point, I decided that I wanted to draw as clear a picture I could of the paramecium. So to do that, I wanted an even better view of the interior of the paramecium. So I turned the microscope up rather high to see its organelles in better detail. And because I was privately cheering about how I'd modified the experiment in a way that made it both more easy to locate the paramecium, that also made it very unlikely that a paramecium would move at any rate so fast as to constantly avoid the concentrated view of the microscope, I simply just illuminated the microscope and peered at the organelles while drawing my diagram. Now, the one factor that did slip my mind, maybe I was a little overconfident that I'd modified a scientific test, but I forgot that light is also heat. So I turned up the intensity of the microscope just to keep looking at the paramecium in greater detail, and I just noticed it slowly starting to bulge a little bit, and then the exterior of, I don't know if skin is the right word, but the exterior of the body of the paramecium, as I turned the light up, began to wobble a bit, and then the paramecium physically exploded. I still remember that hitting a twang of conscience, because yeah, I'd thought of the paramecium and whether like methyl cellulose would feel like an intruder to it, like whether, you know, it's trying to move at its natural pace. So I thought I'd done it a favor by, you know, making sure it had its algae and not using a foreign substance like methyl cellulose, which, you know, just for my convenience to slow it down. So yeah, I turned the light, which is to say the heat, up on the microscope, only to watch this little paramecium bugger fully explode on me. It burst and its organelles started to roll out of this exterior burst on the single-celled organism. I actually got quite sad, even though, you know, no one seemed to complain about me killing a paramecium, but I felt bad. And I guess what the experiment illuminated to me is something that it was like a reconfirmation of something I've always kind of understood, and that is that in science, the observer effect changes the nature of the subject being observed. And so that experiment was more like a living parable to me. My my book I might write a chapter of the parable of the paramecium. But the whole experiment just it kind of reinforced something I've always understood about what causes things like what can contribute to a citizen's violent acts out of sheer terror. I am into causality when it comes to trying to judge a dangerous person for what their immorality is and what dangers they're capable of. As I've, it wasn't completely my goal with my pseudonyms and online forum accounts to unmask the very worst in certain men, but when you deconvert from religion and when you hate the crucifixion of Jesus, as far as Christianity goes, I'd imagine I used to have a dream where the crucifixion had just started and they'd left him on the cross, and some friends and I and Mum, we rock up to the cross, and Mum uses her surgical equipment from the hospital's operating theatre to rip the nails out of Jesus' wrists and feet, and we give him a pair of jeans and a suit and tie, and use antiseptic wipes to remove the crown of thorns, and use these antiseptic wipes to make sure his skin's alright. And once he's off the cross, we hovel away to safety, and I turn back and light the cross on fire, as it has no one on it. It's the one thing I don't mind about the Ku Klux Klan, except I don't know what their religious imperative is when they burn crosses, whether it's anti-Semitism or whether I'm not sure. My only real awareness of the Ku Klux Klan comes from a John Safran documentary. You can only falsify so many religious systems before theism in general becomes nauseously off-putting. But yeah, that was that. I mean, I guess I learned, as this little talk here is on the observer effect. I've admitted to feeling oppressed by the police state mentality. I look back at that camp I went on as a kid, and I think, well, the judgment made of me just for, I'm not sure what the offence even was, insofar as I hit a few peach stones over the fence, and the neighbour didn't tell me off. He confronted me directly, having collected the peach stones into a plant pot and handed them back to me. So I went back out the back and started hitting them again, just into regions of my yard, or the occasional one went back over the fence again into his yard. But he didn't voice a direct complaint to me, and Mum didn't voice a direct complaint to me. She just said, "You're going on this camp with the cops." I didn't regret the camp in certain respects. Like, I grew to enjoy abseiling, though I found it frightening at first. The company of this nice lady from the ABC, Donna, she was brilliant. I was very fond of her. She was my favourite person on that camp. I made a friend called Ben Brown. I made friends with a few of the other people there they were more delinquent than me. They called me Casper. Because when we went abseiling, I was wearing white overalls, and when we abseiled down the roof of a cave, even with my harness on, my body weight was too light that I couldn't free fall down the cave. I had to physically feed the rope through the harness. to lower myself and shake my body to drop down to the ground level of the cave. But aside from being fed condensed milk in tubes, and aside from, the policemen assisting in establishing these harnesses, I really can't remember them saying much to me about what they thought of my character, conscience, or things like that. It was, the real mature one was this lady Donna from the ABC. But yeah, given my experiences from 2010 to now, I'm starting to think that there's some real multifaceted concerns for me to resolve, which I'm thinking about how I'm going to go about resolving them. It's a real shame if, kids from, divorced families that get referred to camps with the police and then have this association with police that they didn't ask for, but they cooperate anyway, and they, you learn a thing or two. I didn't learn. I didn't enjoy the religious overtones of the camp, and from memory, I wasn't too. The police just seemed standoffish. I didn't get into any fights or arguments with any of the other members of this camp, this wee Jasper camp, but I did make a pretty cool friendship with this news reporter Donna, and I'll always remember her. So I think looking back, I think in their frequent silence that they too were perhaps prejudiced, because they'd probably done what every sort of semi-genuine friend I've had in Australia has done, and that's, what's the most disturbing part of your childhood? Oh, okay, we'll focus on that every time we look at you. We'll pray for you for it every time we pray. I absolutely hate being prayed for. It's, it means I've got. You watched the Satan clip by Marilyn Manson. It's about to me, my mucosa cyst, which that's my retirement present for listening to dictations on genetics. I now have concerns, for any kid who has endured mistreatment, whether it's from dysfunction in the family unit, or whether it's getting picked on or beaten up at school, or whatever, that results in experiences during childhood where you are made to bond with police in some fashion, such as, with these sorts of reformative camps. And if they go on not really having the support of a stable family unit that are there for them when, during the tough times, I know that if I pretend to be cheery, then my Christian parents will be happy. I'm now at the age where, I'm starting to go, what will they do if my skull's bashed in? Will they visit me in hospital? If I report this person who assaulted me and there's another magistrate's court hearing, will my mother even care to appear at the hearing? So, because I was instructed to defend my mother and sister from age 5 on, meant there were only a handful of sibling rivalry. Most friends I speak to seem to have been involved in more sibling rivalry than I was, because I was given this guardian status in kindergarten, and I look back now and see it as having been really, really draining. I also see it as quite fucked, really, that the reciprocity just isn't there. I'm heavily medicated because of my disabling pain, and it's not. And even my mum just thinks, oh, he's a drug addict. I'm like, if I was a drug addict, I would not be choosing. I wouldn't be wanting these sorts of drugs. And I'd be at some nightclub right now. I don't like the term addict because it implies that you're not able to, you're not able to stop when you want to. And I mean, I don't even like being on these pain medications. They're necessary for the time being for me to be able to function. So yeah, despite all the talks we've had about unbelief, my mother, I know, is still she's still very much into believing that, Big Brother is God and Jesus, ready to make her live forever. It's a sad thing to see that, and I'm not sure what the prime reasons are for getting a little rejected, whether it's my my kind of liberalist social ethics, or in the past, I have conservative aspects to my character too, but they sort of tend to emerge when I'm in the company of, fellow shy, nerdy people. Yeah, this and all this talk about genetics causing things it's so bizarre, because even in the States there are doctors claiming they've discovered the gene that causes God belief, and I think that's so off the wall, just to try and make that claim. It's once again implying that, contrary to the facts of a conversion, a person doesn't choose to believe in God or get converted by someone in their church to believe in God. No, a gene activates, and that's why they believe in God, because of a gene. I mean, that's absolutely topsy-turvy. Other Christians will say God created you and created your genes, and yeah, I've certainly experienced more than I've ever wanted to experience about the relationship between right-wing Christianity and right-wing religious psychologists and psychiatrists, more to the point. It's as if they love human sacrifice, because, or they want to sacrifice you to their cause, because, with everything I've been through, I learned to hang on to myself very young. I also absolutely learnt what, violent criminal offences are, the damage they can do to people, and so for me it was sibling rivalry on occasions till about age 12, where I just began to notice that the opposite of a foul temper is emotionally suffering through a point of contention, and resolving it by thinking for yourself. And so I noticed that at about age 12, and I realized that given how we started out, I'm not making matters any better for my mother or sister by being a brat and getting involved in sibling rivalry. I worked that out by age 12, and then, verbally I could be a smart ass from time to time, and a girl in one of my science classes once smashed my head into a table and caused bleeding down one side of my head. We're still friends, and I didn't dob her in or report her because I was part of a joke made by the jocks at the back of the classroom. And I was trying to fit in with the jocks that day, so there's a sense in which I would say to myself, well, Luke, you've learned your lesson. But, one twisted thing that grew out of people talking about transference, genetics, sins, is that they all expected me to take after, the worst possible example I could find in my blood family, and I can only imagine them all having close ties to their fathers. I unfortunately can't recite to you a single moral lesson or storybook lesson from my blood father. I just know about what terrified him, and there's more than one cause. And that's in a way that's part of what I was doing on these Christian forums. I had a theory that there are big picture thinkers that have been around, that come from all directions. That you've got Penn and Teller, you've got Marilyn Manson, you've got the Marquis de Sade talking about how states' criminals are influenced by the state and states' leaders. They can be influenced by the army to shoot someone. For example. Yeah, and so, my nan would read me Cluedo mini mysteries as a young child. But so when I grew up to, learn that there are these profiles that stipulate that a person's mind essentially thinks within the parameters of a profile that sums up their motives to come from a single cause, which they've tried to do with me in relation to video, which I've wanted to make music, make video clips, and do that sort of thing. I don't have I've been told psychosis is disconnection with reality. I've wondered in what context they mean. I mean, obviously, if you're a fiction lover, you obviously therefore have the cognitive liberties to be free to imagine and dream. I think, or have nightmares. And yet, that doesn't disconnect you from reality, because you still know that you're really in bed when you're having the nightmare. You'll wake up the next day. Yeah, I'm into realism. I'm into surrealism. I'm into metaphysics, epistemology, non-theism. So I don't appreciate getting told that I don't comprehend reality. I comprehend everything I've been taught at work. I've rebuked pretty much everything I was taught at church. Once a boss at work tried to once she essentially called me a child of God, even after how godless I became from teens onwards. I'd literally become my own source of regenerating strength and complex thinking. And if you're into art, that's artificial, but it does on some level. It's designed to make people think about their realities. I just dislike the term make-believe. because from my sense of the way people talk, they go, well, do you make believe in, you know, the game Unreal Tournament? And then if you say, yeah, I love it, they seem, from my mind, to be more inclined to start sort of charging you, going, well, are you getting your prescriptive morals from this 3D shooter, Unreal Tournament? And you hear about cases like that on Bullshit. They talk about scientists reporting that the way that the brain can light up a certain way because a person now has a young kid under the age of 10 that plays Call of Duty on his Xbox. Had a certain scientist who I would guess was a right-wing Christian scientist. See, they get off on the statement to see the light. So, they gave him a brain scan, saw that his amygdala was, a bit psyched from playing these shoot-'em-up games that he even understood was fantasy violence. So it's not real, but the opinion of the scientist assessing them is that, yeah, God reveals his will and shows you what is good and bad through seeing the light, means that because of that, as scientists, these people will essentially quietly prioritize their belief system over law, over liberal scientific method, and go, at Unreal Tournaments creating psychopathic children, which is once again probably a fallback to and pander to the doctrine of original sin from the Bible. I'm very disappointed that, I put decades of my life into this private sector company, which started out with me humbly confiding into them that, no, I am not a member of the Christian church. I am not involved in right-wing fundamentalist Christian dogmatic thinking or faith-based belief in the supernatural. I am an atheist, a non-believer. We're not a group where each of us is an individual. I can't say I've agreed with every single point ever made by any one particular atheist. The closest would be George Smith. But I actually look for points here and there where I disagree, and I stop and think about, why do I disagree with this atheist? Because we like to constantly think through things, and if we're holding on to a philosophical concept that is just corked us into a constant train of thought, we desperately love to have those problems answered and solved in a fresh perspective from another atheist. And that's what I love about what other people might want to call the atheist movement. Getting together for a grass festival with guest appearances from Dawkins and other people making public addresses. Atheism is not a religion. It's that sort of vibe is just like if you were going to a music festival, because no one atheist is obliged to share in the worldview of the atheist to their right or next to them. That's absolutely not what atheism is. Atheism is not an alternative group to being in a religion. It's only as far as any one individual atheist is concerned. I mean, all that every atheist has in common is atheism. Like without theism, which is to lack theism. So aside from that, an atheist could be any type of person that they want. It's just the only thing that will make them not an atheist is if they're a theist, if they take up God belief. So long as they're without God belief, they're free to be any kind of atheist they want. It's just that I would prefer to see a rise of the more enlightened, and to see the progress. I miss Christopher Hitchens. I'm going to attempt a book of my own. But yeah, I really think that doubt, the right to doubt and to think freely for oneself, to have no God to answer to, I think it's absolutely beautiful. And it would have been even better if Julia Gillard had stayed on, and we still had her support to this day. I'm going to sign off for tonight. I will make more. Okay, so now I'll go back to the actual legitimate experiment that was deleted from the last 2 takes. I was talking about the Stanford prison experiment. This was an experiment where a culture sample of about 40 people, I think most, was established out of healthy citizens with no history of any mental disorders or anything like that. Oh, they all had jobs, but they were taken to an empty prison facility, and half of them were assigned guard roles, given guard uniforms, the itinerary of tasks for a guard and guard duty, and the other half were given prisoner uniforms, made to be prisoners, put in cells. And the experiment was supposed to last over a number of days, where they were going to observe the interplay, essentially, between the guards and the inmates. But what they found, to their astonishment, was that they had to call the whole experiment off. And it was deemed an unethical experiment because within quite a short amount of time, I think at least a day, but possibly a day or 2 or something like that, many of the prisoners were snapping and yelling or trying to harm themselves in their cell, or yelling, swearing at the guards, and many of the guards were getting aggressive towards the inmates, threatening them, and I think possibly 1 or 2 physical fights initiated. And they were just astonished. Those running the experiment were astonished at the way that these average people that didn't know each other but knew that they were all volunteers for a social experiment could, within such a short amount of time, fall into these roles and play these roles and be so animalistic in the way that they were losing their temper, that they were harming, trying to harm one another. And that was, I thought, a fascinating observation to note about the Stanford prison experiment. And the other one was, I know less about this, but 1 or 2 qualified psychologists or psychiatrists, I think only just psychologists, each failed to disclose their credentials and qualifications, and then went and voluntarily admitted themselves to psychiatric facilities. I vaguely recall a note that once the inside, their instructions were just to speak completely normally, and like all their normal behaviors were just being noted down and described in psychological terms, as indicative of this or that disorder, or this particular disposition is indicative of this from the DSM-4. So they apparently found it difficult to get out once they got in. They had to end up telling the staff and the security that they were themselves psychologists, that they were essentially taking note of. So that would have looked at the effect of stereotypes, presumptuous judgment, stigma. And if this DSM-4 and books like that have words for everything, it's almost to suggest once you were put under the microscope and been put into some sort of study process, then because that sort of language is being used to describe you, it doesn't matter what you say or do, or how well articulated you are, they're still able to say that anything you've said or done can be accounted for, and then tied back into a more generalized term for a disorder. And then thirdly was a tragic. I think this one was a true story. And the police were just stunned, or you know, apartment complex, multi-story, and a fire had struck one of the higher up apartments, and the person living there was calling out for help, and all the rest of the members of residents that lived in this apartment block had gathered around the outside of the apartment block, staring at the burning apartment, looking up at it, thinking, and they just, what was noted was that all of them got together, and all of them just thought, someone will definitely save them and help this person. Sure, someone's got to be on the task right now. Someone will get to it. It was like that saying, anybody said that everybody could do the important things somebody should do. Something, 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 all the good things that nobody did. And anyway, in the end, I think the person got injured or died. And later, a series of interviews were taken, and all these other residents and tenants were saying, we all gathered around in concern, but we were just, each of us were convinced someone was going to go and do something. And because they all had that thought, no one did anything. But yeah, I can't recall the name for that effect either, so I'm sleep deprived.
Roger Toll and Gary Cairns think that they are better than existential psychoanalysts, but they are 16th century Freemasons. So they can't really measure a fart in a bathtub. The bathtub is too modern for their beliefs. Go back to the 16th century, you herpes bald faggot.
So yeah, unfortunately these videos are being deleted. It seems made corrupt files. They keep reporting back as bad or corrupt files. It's an interesting how there's a correlation between the topics that I bring up in those particularly corrupted files. Ones that you might say are more trivial and entertainment are making it through, making it to the deterioration webisode show. And concerning this man who I used to work for, in his mind, he'll be thinking things of me like absurd charges. I have some sort of obsession with him, or I'm interested in being associated with him. He might try to point at his commercial or economic successes and say Luke has this fascinating. The men who I'm interested in include mine's like David Bowie. I'm very real way still mourning his loss. Both what he did as a social phenomenon, pioneering the bisexual rights movement, I think is incredible. Plus his art skills, his ability in theatre, movies like Labyrinth from the 80s, and then when you would watch how much of a chameleon he was as a performer and a writer and a singer and a musician, that he would reinvent himself in a new genre of. So to continue that, there's no organised group of atheists who get together. There have been atheist conferences, and then the atheist next to you could be a moral relativist who thinks that the only morality is an illusion, and everyone's just got self-serving interests at the base of all their moral composure. There could be a moral objectivist who think that, independent of opinion and what anyone else thinks, there are certain objective moral truths. All one atheist needs in common with another atheist is that they lack the chosen subscription to adhere to a religious belief system. I look tired today. And I'm very tired. This has been a very, very tiring decade. And you know, those who have messed with me since the start of the decade, you would think by now I would know that they had truly backed off. Um, second. It's about how are you? Well, yeah, so I've been weighing up the arguments, you know, is it, do I put Roger Toll, especially, or Roger Toll and Gary Cairns into that same category as, you know, the teacher at Marist Boys College, or you know, Cardinal George Pell. Because it does seem from my inquiry into their religion that they have a stance that is perhaps more respectable than the Christian faith tradition. It nonetheless does seem to be theistic. What was astonishing enough that it made me want to be a researcher of him. Was how he was so adamant that he'd worked certain things out about my life, you know, like so that he'd have to say, well, be a good poof. I'm like, I'm not sure what, like, the worst thing I can generally think of is, or was, a bit of a phase of sibling rivalry that I then realized because, in a sense, in a sense, the three of us are recovering and going through the rest of our childhood and recovering, and I started to get into music and form the band ties that, you know, to my favorite bands. It's still my favorite bands to this day, and I started taking interest in philosophy. I disagreed with my mother's side of the family's suggestion that the moral being can't become aware of themselves, you can't enjoy like existential moralism and unless you're a Christian. I think that's a horrible idea. But yeah, those statements from Roger told you were sexually embarrassed by your father, and the way that his company stressed talk about genes and genetics, I knew he couldn't have. I also know that my second stepfather, I never called him father, and my first stepfather passed away when I was 10, so he had to have only been referring to early childhood, and my blood father went to prison when I was 5 or 6, so it meant he'd had thoughts about me having some sort of sexually based experience, feeling, or thought at some time, and that was caused by my father, according to what Roger's statements, and I just could not, for the life of me, I could not recall a memory. I could not think of understand the feeling he meant. To learn later that, yeah, he genuinely does spend time, and does he excuse this manner of thinking on the basis that he's into research, or is it discrimination? Is it violation of the Sex Discrimination Act and the Religious Discrimination Act together? What is it? It's one of the most pedo things I've ever heard. The other men disgust me. Doesn't really even have the guts to qualify some of his statements to your face. and statements like "be a good poof." He obviously thought I was running at risk of being a bad poof, because he didn't. And I met his company because I caught his shoplifter. So I didn't submit a resume or anything like that, or like go like I really, really would love to work here. I just caught their shoplifter and then asked while I was there, and they said, "Can we thank you somehow?" I asked if I could have a job. But if he thinks my moral character is that shady that I warrant being pulled aside in the middle of a shop shift when I haven't done anything or said anything to offend anyone, and get told be a good poof, it's as if you're saying, well, you're a poof either way, whether you're bad or good. But yeah, and this video file seems to be deleted. I don't think his views of gay people and how that, how their hearts and minds work is immune from charges of being offensive to the gay community, because he seems to think all gay men should hate women, all women, instead of that focus, archetypal focus that it's a gay man's preference to be romantically involved with other men, and it was a lesbian woman's preference to be involved with women. So that's who they prefer, not, a lesbian woman may be defined as a person who hates all men, because that's not true either of all. That's not, so the guy's an idiot, and that's all he'll have to try to say in the end to try and explain himself, is he'll have to try and call himself nuts, insane, or getting old, and old age is taking its toll. But he's that persistent. People have called him ruthless, like ruthlessly persistent in getting what he wants. That I was thinking as I moved up in the company, well then surely, like, the more work I'm doing when Roger's around, I bet he has so many really insightful, wise, intelligent things to say, because he must love having responsibility with all these stores he's opened and all of this. Like, he's helped pioneer a whole franchise. That's something he's got to be proud of. And then you don't hear him say shit all that's even relevant. And I'd read books on ethical theory, stoicism, ethics, debates from moral relativists against moral objectivists, books arguing that moral objectivism is entirely possible in the context of atheological language, arguments that morality are mere illusions, arguments that morality are just social conventions as a byproduct of our evolution, arguments that morals come about as a matter of primarily the influences of nature and our genetic makeup, and others that argue that nurture and example and monkey see, monkey do phenomenology accounts for the formation of most of our ethics, and arguments that I've quite possibly read more about the phenomenology of moral philosophy than Roger has. But yeah, so I learned that in his mind. He's so insistent. He's the only man I've known on the planet to be so verbally aggressive and forceful in telling me that I have to be a gay man. But yeah, I started to realize this actually, it's a guise that he's trying to say these sort of things as an employer or a pharmacist. This is actually like the psychotic element to a religious mind. That's what I began to work out about him, because you might have, like, growing up as you have imaginary friends in your head. You might pretend you're friends with a celebrity here, there, or whatever, but I'm not sure what, in the Freemason church, I'm not sure whether Lucifer functions as a sex symbol? Like, do they imagine Lucifer watching them when they're having sex? I understand their narrative something to do with Lucifer destroying the Christian God, but that's one man versus another man. So his definition of a gay man, your responsibility comes from the rebellion against your own sexuality. To me, that just sounds like him going on again about, you know, Lucifer fighting off God. I'm a non-theist, so I don't think about, and I love the Privacy Act. I don't think about Lucifer fighting God over and over again. But if he's religious affinity for male deities in fights with other male deities, you know, something from the grand old years of paganism, has nothing to do with his responsibility as an employer in the first place. It's unprofessional in the second place, and it has nothing to do with pharmacy in the third place. It has nothing to do with my workplace training and education in the fifth place. And yeah, I can't understand why corrections is a line of work that interests this man, because it's really a physician heal thyself type situation. Like, if you want conflicts, try and prove your stupid Freemason. The Freemasons, like, they're not worth a mention in the school of in the current arena of philosophical debate. They I'm sure representatives of theirs have been invited to tons of debates with unbelievers, but you look at it on YouTube and it's not much to find. That Roger's got that monopolist streak to his character. Like, he's a monopolist, but you know, in healthcare, who wants to be a monopolist? It's like it's almost like an oxymoron. The term shouldn't exist. The healthcare monopolist sounds like a guy that has the means to make people sick. And I suppose you might say he has his ways of doing that. But yeah, I just thought, well, how truly, if that was the most he can come up with saying to me after running all his checks, and I was a member of staff, then how wrong is he potentially about these citizens he judges, like, who he doesn't even know and who never works for him. 14 minutes. I look tired. I'll be back.